The moment I realized my name wasn't on the seating chart, my sister-in-law was already laughing. Not quietly, not behind her hand. She laughed the way people laugh when they want you to hear it, head tilted, eyes bright, making sure everyone at the table caught the joke before I did. "Oh, did nobody tell her?" she said to my brother. "I mean, we only had so many spots. And honestly, a bridesmaid who can't even afford a +1 kind of sets the tone, doesn't she?" My brother said nothing. He looked at his water glass like it had something interesting in it. I was standing in the middle of the Hargrove Garden Room at the Ashford Hotel, holding a small clutch purse I bought specifically for that night, wearing a blush pink dress I'd driven 40 minutes to return and rebuy in the right size because I wanted to look like I belonged there. And the escort card with my name on it didn't exist. None of them looked surprised. Not my mother. Not my aunt. Not the 3 cousins who'd been CC'd on every wedding email for the past 14 months. Just me, standing there while a hostess in all black quietly tried to sort out where to put me. And my sister-in-law moved on to greeting someone else like I'd already left the room. I hadn't left yet. But I would. My name is Penny. I'm 31 years old. I'm a dental hygienist in Columbus, Ohio, and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment that I pay for entirely by myself. I'm not rich. I've never pretended to be. I drive a 2019 Honda Civic with a small dent above the rear left wheel that I keep meaning to fix, and I pack my lunch most days, and I think about my student loans more than I'd like to admit. My brother's name is Scott. He's 3 years older than me, and for most of our lives, he was my closest friend. We grew up in a small house in Dayton with parents who worked hard and didn't have much extra. We understood that about our family. Or at least, I thought we both did. When Scott was 27, he started dating Melissa. She came from money, not generational wealth, but new money. The kind that arrives fast and wants everyone to know it. Her father had sold a logistics company when she was in college, and the family had been spending the payout ever since. They lived in a big colonial in Dublin with a pool they used 4 months of the year and a kitchen renovation that got its own Instagram account. I didn't dislike Melissa at first. She was confident and pretty, and she laughed at Scott's jokes, which had always been the fastest way to his heart. But over time, I started noticing things. The way she'd redirect conversations about my job to conversations about her cousin who was in medical school. The way she'd say, "Good for you," when I mentioned something I was proud of, in a tone that made it sound like consolation. The way she looked at me at family gatherings, not with dislike exactly, but with something quieter than that. Assessment. The kind of look that places you in a category and locks the door. Scott proposed on a trip to Portugal 2 years ago. I found out through a group text. That stung a little, but I told myself it was fine. Weddings are busy. People get caught up. I sent a long message saying I was so happy for them, and I meant every word of it. When Melissa asked me to be a bridesmaid 3 months later, I cried. I genuinely did. I thought maybe I'd been reading things wrong. I thought maybe this was her reaching toward me. I said yes immediately. I said yes before I fully understood what saying yes would cost. The next 14 months were a slow education. The bridesmaid dresses were $340 each, not including alterations. The bachelorette trip was a long weekend in Nashville. Flights, hotel, the bar crawl package, the matching satin robes, the custom tumblers with everyone's nicknames on them. My nickname was Penny Pincher, which Melissa had apparently thought was funny. I smiled when I opened the box. I practiced smiling in the car on the way home. I spent just over $2,000 being a bridesmaid in my brother's wedding. That's not including the gift, which was a $200 item off their registry, a Le Creuset Dutch oven in the color Melissa had marked as her first choice. I took extra shifts. I skipped a trip to see a college friend in Denver. I didn't buy new tires when I probably should have. I didn't complain. Not once. Not to Scott, not to my mother, not to anyone. Because this is my brother's wedding and I wanted to be there. I wanted to be part of it. I want to make that clear, because what happened later, I need you to understand I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't carrying resentment like a weapon. I was just a person who loved her brother and had spent a year proving it in very concrete financial terms. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday night in May. I drove down from Columbus the evening before, checked into a Holiday Inn Express I'd booked myself because the room block at the main hotel was $300 a night, and that simply wasn't happening. I ironed my dress in my room. I got there early. Everything was fine until it wasn't. The seating chart was displayed on a wooden easel near the entrance to the venue. It was decorated with dried eucalyptus and small white cards in calligraphy, and each table had a name. Not a number, a name, like Whispering Pines and Blue Ridge and Sycamore. Very Pinterest. I walked up to it the way everyone does, scanning for my own name first, the way you always do. I didn't find it. I went through every table twice, then a third time. I checked the overflow card near the back, the smaller one for late editions. Not there either. You look lost. I turned around. It was Melissa's younger sister, already holding a glass of Prosecco, watching me with an expression that was almost kind. Almost. I can't find my name, I said. She shrugged, just slightly. Melissa probably figured you just sit wherever. You know how she is. She likes things to flow. I didn't know what that meant. I stood there for a moment and then went to find the event coordinator, a woman named, I don't remember her name, but she had a headset and a clipboard and the look of someone who had handled worse. She checked her list. She checked it again. She called someone on her headset. My name was not on any list. Melissa appeared then from somewhere to my left with Scott right behind her. She was wearing a pale yellow sundress and her hair was blown out and she looked, I will admit, genuinely beautiful. She looked at the coordinator, then at me, and something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name. Oh, Penny. She said it the way you say, oh, when something mildly inconvenient has happened. A spilled drink. A wrong order. I completely forgot to add a seat for you at the main table. We ran out of room. Ran out of room at the rehearsal dinner, I said. It fills up so fast. You know how it is. I looked at my brother. He was doing the thing with the water glass again, except there was no water glass this time, so he was looking at the floor. I'm your bridesmaid, I said. Not loudly. Just clearly. I'm in the wedding party. Right, but the head table is just immediate family and the wedding party from his side, and then, I am his side. Melissa smiled. The smile that I had spent 14 months trying to earn. I mean, it's just a dinner, Penny. You can grab a seat at the cousins' table. I think there's an extra chair. Don't make it a whole thing. That was when Scott finally spoke. Yeah, Pen, it's fine. Just grab a chair. I looked at my brother for a long moment. He met my eyes for about 2 seconds and then looked away again. And Melissa laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small one aimed at her maid of honor who was standing slightly behind her. A private laugh, except not private at all. Honestly, she said, just loud enough. I don't know why she's surprised. It's not like she's contributed that much anyway. There it was. Not like she's contributed. I had paid $2,000 to stand in her wedding. I had driven 4 hours round trip for each of the 3 dress fittings. I had thrown a bridal shower tea at my apartment with hand-cut sandwiches and a custom cake and decorations I'd spent 2 weekends making because the craft store aesthetic was what Melissa said she wanted. I had done all of it quietly, without complaint, because I thought it mattered. Not like she's contributed. I didn't say any of that. I took a breath, and I said, okay. Then I'll head out. Melissa blinked. Sorry, if there's no seat for me, I'll go. Have a great night. I picked up my clutch. I walked to the coat check. I walked through the front doors of the Ashford Hotel and sat down on a bench near the valet stand and pulled out my phone and stared at it without seeing anything on the screen. My hands were very steady. I noticed that. I thought they'd shake, but they didn't. I texted my mom, I'm heading back to the hotel. I'll explain later. Then I called a lift. I did not cry until I was back in my room at the Holiday Inn Express, sitting on the edge of the bed in my blush pink dress, and then I cried for about 20 minutes, which I think was reasonable. And then I washed my face and ordered pad thai from a place 3 blocks away and watched a documentary about competitive dog grooming until I fell asleep. I want to tell you that I felt righteous, that I felt powerful, but I mostly just felt tired. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my father's older brother had been standing in the corridor just outside the garden room when Melissa said what she said. My uncle has been in my life since I was born. He's 64 years old, retired now, and he was a general contractor for 30 years who built his business from 2 employees to 43. He doesn't say a lot. He listens. He's the kind of man who shows up at graduations, at hospital waiting rooms, at every single holiday, always with something he baked himself because his wife taught him to bake before she passed and he never stopped. He had flown in from Phoenix for the wedding. He adored Scott. He had written the check for $15,000 toward the venue costs because my brother had asked and my uncle had said yes the way he always says yes to people he loves. Quietly, without conditions, without expecting anything back. He'd stepped away from the pre-dinner gathering to take a phone call. He was walking back through the corridor when he passed the half-open door to the garden room and heard his niece's name said in a certain tone. He stopped. He heard the part about the seat. He heard, "Don't make it a whole thing." He heard what Melissa said about contributing. He heard Scott say nothing. My uncle stood in that corridor for a moment. Then he went back to the cocktail area, found his drink and finished it, and was perfectly pleasant for the rest of the evening. Nobody would have known anything was different. I only found out about it 3 days later, after the wedding was over and I was back in Columbus and had more or less decided to significantly reduce my presence in my brother's life going forward. Not with anger, just with the quiet kind of distance that protects you. My uncle called me on a Tuesday evening. I was doing dishes. "I heard what happened at the rehearsal dinner," he said. I stopped washing the mug I was holding. "How?" "I was there. In the hallway. I heard most of it." I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "I'm sorry you had to hear that, Penny." His voice was very even. "Don't apologize to me." He asked me to tell him the full story. So I did. I told him about the dress, and Nashville, and the tumblers, and the bridal shower, and the $2,000, and the name that wasn't on any list. I told him about Melissa's laugh. I told him about Scott looking at the floor. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Okay. Just okay." I didn't hear anything else for about 2 weeks. Then my mom called. My mom called on a Saturday morning, and from her voice I could tell immediately that something had shifted. She had that careful, deliberate tone she gets when she's delivering news she's still processing herself. "Your uncle called Scott," she said. "Okay," I said slowly. He told him that he'd been in the hallway, that he heard everything. I sat down on my kitchen floor, which is where I tend to end up during important phone calls. And he also told Scott that he'd been rethinking some things. About the money. The $15,000 for the venue had already been spent, obviously. The wedding had happened, but my uncle, it turned out, had also been informally helping Scott and Melissa in other ways I hadn't fully known about. He'd been covering the difference on their car payments for the past year while Scott transitioned jobs. He'd offered to help with the down payment on the house they were planning to buy in the spring. He'd been what my mother, in a low voice, described as a soft landing for a lot of things. He told Scott that he was stepping back from that role, not cruelly, not with an ultimatum or a dramatic speech. He simply said that he'd seen how my brother handled the situation at the rehearsal dinner, the silence, the looking away, and that he had some serious thinking to do about where he directed his support going forward. He said, "A man who watches his sister be humiliated in public and says nothing is not the man I thought I raised alongside your father." Scott called me that same day. I almost didn't pick up. I let it ring 4 times and then something made me answer. He started by saying he was sorry, which surprised me. And then he said it again, which surprised me more. Because Scott has always had difficulty with that word. He said sorry for not booking me at the table. He said sorry for what Melissa said. He said sorry for staying quiet when he shouldn't have. He also said, and I want to be fair to him here, that he didn't fully know about all of it. About how much I'd spent. About the things Melissa had said on the bachelorette trip. About some of the smaller moments that had added up. I believe him on that. I think he had been choosing not to look closely, which is its own kind of failure. But I don't think he fully understood the shape of what I'd been navigating. We talked for a long time. More than an hour. I cried a little. He cried a little too, which I hadn't expected. I didn't forgive everything in that call. That's not how forgiveness works. At least not for me. But I heard him. And he heard me. And that felt like a beginning of something rather than a continuation of what had been happening before. Melissa did not call. She sent a text 3 days later that said, "I'm sorry if you felt excluded. That was never the intention." I read it twice, and then I put my phone face down on the counter and made a cup of tea and thought about whether "I'm sorry if you felt" is actually an apology or just a sentence wearing an apology's clothes. I decided it was the latter, but I kept it. Evidence? Maybe. Or just proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. There's something I've been turning over in my mind ever since all of this happened, and it has to do with my uncle. He's not a dramatic person. He didn't call a family meeting. He didn't send a group email. He didn't make a speech at the wedding, which I was not at. He just, quietly, privately, redirected his generosity. He told the people who needed to hear it what he had witnessed, and he let the consequences follow naturally. Some people have said to me when I've told this story that what he did was too harsh, that pulling financial support is an extreme response, that Melissa was tactless, not malicious, that my brother was conflict avoidant, not cruel. Maybe. I've thought about all of those framings, but here's what I come back to. My uncle had been financially supporting two adults who turned around and publicly dismissed someone they were supposed to love. He wasn't punishing them, he was just stopping. Stopping the quiet assumption that his generosity was guaranteed. Stopping the arrangement where he carried them and they felt free to be careless with other people. He told me later in a different call that he'd been feeling something for a while before the rehearsal dinner. That Melissa had made small comments at Thanksgiving that bothered him. That he'd noticed the way Scott deferred to her even when he seemed uncomfortable. That the corridor moment wasn't the beginning of his concern. It was just the moment that made the concern undeniable. "I'm not angry at them," he said, "but I'm also not a bank account." And I think they'd started to forget that. He's not angry at them. I thought about that for a long time. It's been about 5 months now. Scott and Melissa are still living in their apartment. The house purchase got pushed back, which I imagine has something to do with the recalibrated financial situation. My brother and I talk more than we did before the wedding, which is strange and also good. He's been more present. He asks how I'm doing in a way that sounds like he actually wants to know. Melissa and I are polite when we're in the same room. I don't expect more than that right now. And I don't think she does either. There's a version of the future where we find something more than politeness, and I'm not closing the door on it. I'm just not holding it open either. My uncle came to visit me in Columbus in September. We went to a diner he'd looked up beforehand. He always researches diners. It's one of his things. And we ate eggs and toast and talked for 3 hours about everything except what had happened. And then at the end he said, "You did the right thing, walking out." I told him I hadn't felt right. I'd felt tired and sad, and I'd eaten pad thai alone in a hotel room. He said, "Doing the right thing doesn't always feel heroic. Sometimes it just feels like going home." I thought about that on the drive back, about what it means to leave a room that doesn't have a seat for you, about how for a long time I've been working so hard to earn my place in a situation where the people deciding whether I belonged had already made up their minds, about how much energy I spent trying to fit into a table that was never going to have enough room for me, because the person who said it hadn't wanted me there to begin with. My uncle said something else that I've been thinking about too. He said the hardest part of getting older is learning the difference between loyalty and accommodation. That loyalty means showing up for someone even when it costs you. That accommodation means making yourself smaller so someone else doesn't have to confront anything uncomfortable. He said Scott had been accommodating Melissa at my expense, and that for a long time I had been accommodating all of them. Out of love, yes, but also out of fear. Fear of being the difficult one. Fear of causing a scene. Fear of being the sister who made everything about herself, which is what they would have said if I'd raised any of it earlier. I don't know if he's entirely right about me. I think my motivations were more mixed than that. But I think about it, have you ever kept quiet in a room full of people who were counting on your silence? Have you ever told yourself you were being gracious when maybe you were just being afraid? And if you have, where are you watching from today? Because I think a lot of us have been in that garden room in some form. I think a lot of us know what it feels like to scan a list for your own name and not find it. The difference, I'm learning, is what you do after. You can wait for a seat that's never coming. You can shrink yourself to fit into a space that was never designed for you. Or you can pick up your clutch and your dignity and walk through the front doors and trust that the right table is somewhere you haven't been yet. I'm still finding mine, but I think I'm closer than I was in May, standing in front of that seating chart with eucalyptus and calligraphy all around me, searching for a name that someone had chosen not to write down. Some people show you exactly how much you matter to them. The grace is in believing them the first time and knowing your own worth enough to act on what you've seen. I keep coming back to the seating chart. That wooden easel with the dried eucalyptus and the careful calligraphy, all that effort spent making something beautiful while leaving a person out of it entirely. There's something almost precise about that. You don't accidentally forget to seat your bridesmaid at her own brother's rehearsal dinner. You just decide, quietly, that the inconvenience of including her outweighs whatever you owe her. And then you dress the whole thing up in eucalyptus so it looks intentional in a different way. What I've come to understand is that what happened that night was a consequence of a much longer pattern, mine as much as theirs. I had spent 14 months accommodating a dynamic that wasn't fair to me, not because I was foolish, but because I kept choosing kindness over clarity. I kept believing that if I showed up fully enough, with the right dress, the right gift, the right attitude at the right bridal shower, I would eventually earn a seat at a table that someone had already decided wasn't mine. That's not kindness. That's fear with good manners. My uncle understood something I hadn't let myself see yet. He'd watched people be generous with their silence for years, nodding along, looking away, keeping the peace, and he knew what it cost. Not the financial part, though that mattered too. The deeper cost, the way that staying quiet when something is wrong teaches everyone in the room that the wrong thing is acceptable. He didn't make a scene. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply told the truth about what he'd witnessed and then made a clear-eyed decision about where to place his trust going forward. That takes a kind of courage that looks quiet from the outside but is anything but. Scott's apology surprised me. Not because he said sorry, people say sorry, but because I could hear in his voice that he was actually thinking. Reconsidering. Sitting with the discomfort of having chosen the easier thing in that corridor and understanding what it had cost his sister. That kind of self-examination doesn't come naturally to everyone. It didn't come naturally to everyone. It didn't come naturally to him. But he did it anyway, and I think that matters. Melissa's text didn't surprise me. "I'm sorry if you felt excluded" is not an apology. It's a sentence that protects the person sending it from having to acknowledge what they actually did. I've seen that construction before in other contexts, from other people. It puts the feeling on you, your perception, your sensitivity, your problem, and leaves the action untouched. Real accountability looks different. It says, I did something. It caused harm. I'm sorry for the thing I did, not for the feeling it created in you. What I want, if anything good is going to come from that night, is to be someone who does the harder thing. Not because I'm trying to be admirable, but because I've felt what it's like to be in a room where everyone chose the easier thing, and I know exactly how that lands on the person who absorbs it. I spent a long time trying to be small enough to fit where I wasn't really wanted. I think a lot of us do. We shrink. We over-explain. We show up with Dutch ovens and hand-cut sandwiches and matching satin robes, and we tell ourselves we're being generous when sometimes we're just trying to buy our way into belonging. The bench outside the Ashford Hotel taught me something I couldn't have learned inside it. Some rooms are not going to make space for you no matter how graciously you wait, and the most honest thing you can do, for yourself and honestly for everyone else, is to stand up, pick up your things, and walk out into the night air and trust that your worth doesn't live in someone else's seating chart. It never did.